Welcome, everybody, to the Hempfield Area School District Board of Directors meeting. Would you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to inform you all that we met in executive session from 6 o'clock until 6:55 for legal matters and personnel issues. Roll call, please.
Mr. Alfieri. Here. Ms. Bradgick. Ms. Pretz.
Here.
Ms. DiBittoni.
Here.
Mr. DeAugustine.
Here.
Dr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Ward.
Here.
Dr. Learn.
Here.
Dr. Bompiani.
Present.
Also present are student reps Jacob Ripper and Nick Wiley this evening. Wow. I apologize.
Well, Nick Weil, you have big shoes to fill tonight. Let me tell you. And I'll tell you what, I'll put you on the spot. Nick, would you please read the mission statement for us all?
Yes.
Speak as close to the microphone as you can, bud.
Okay. The Hempfield Area School District, in its commitment to excellence, shall engage and educate all students for personal success through a shared responsibility with the student, family, and community in a safe, secure, and nurturing environment.
Thank you very much, and welcome. And Superintendent's report, Dr. Licky.
Thank you, Dr. Bompiani. Good evening, everyone. We're going to begin this evening with a presentation. Mr. Wismar is going to take the primary lead in sharing a perspective of our historical budget. We know it's becoming that time of the year when we're starting to look forward to the 2021-2022 school year, and we'll be starting budget preparations in the very near future. So what we thought would be to take this in two parts. So this evening, there will be a focus, as I mentioned, on the historical perspective, really a review and going back a number of years and where we've been and where that brings us today. And then the focus of part two, which will be next week, will be an opportunity to see where we are with the current school year, and certainly the unusual school year that it is. So with that, we're going to begin with Mr. Wismar.
Just leave that slide up.
Thank you.
Is each year, the budget development process starts with background information, and the purpose is to provide an understanding of the underlying data and trends that influence the district's financial position. Last year, we had shared information on the enrollment trend in the district, socioeconomics, the historical budget to actual performance, fund balance, and debt service. Somewhere through in the process, usually a little bit later after Christmas, we'll share a county millage comparison, which also gives the board a sense of where Hempfield stands in relationship to the county. And knowing the history and the current situation really does help assist with developing a strong future plan. And I'm going to speak a little bit about the contents before we break into the individual slides. And it's a little bit odd to see the fund balance projection from 14-15. Why is that included? That was really our starting point, which shows how far we've come to resolving many of the district's financial issues. And those issues were primarily driven by PACERs and an increase that we really hadn't, I don't think many people anticipated. Secondly, we'll follow up with taking a look at revenue and expenditure trends over time, which illustrates the district's financial performance and how it has improved over that time period. The third piece is looking at the growth, and that's a percentage perspective. And the purpose of that is just to take a look at, yes, revenue, yes, expenditures are increasing, but at what rate are they increasing? That gives a sense of how we're doing fiscally as far as managing revenue growth and expenditures. Then we're going to take a look at actual versus budget performance and some explanation on the reasons for the current performance or the historical performance. And there's a slide that just includes the historical data that I used to create the initial slides. So if anybody wants to take a look at the actual data that went into this presentation, that's included just for that purpose. We really won't speak to that. As we get a little further in, we're going to take a look at staffing and enrollment over time for the district. We're going to take a look at the district's debt service position. And then the last two pieces are really future planning considerations and thought that we have been working on. One is a high school renovation and/or rebuild. And the last piece is capital and operating
Wayne,
considerations.
Can I interrupt you a minute? Board members, Dr. Walicki sent an email. You should have it, and then the presentation's on the email. Okay.
And the last piece of just the capital and operating considerations as we develop the budget for 21-22. So the first slide, while it may appear a little bit busy, it's that first line that I really want to draw attention to, the one that drops off in 16-17 below zero. And when this was initially shared in 14-15, if we were continuing as is, and as is was using $2.5, $2.6, $2.7 million worth of fund balance over 3 years, if we continued on that pace, by 16-17, we would have exhausted the entire district's fund balance. That didn't happen, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons for that as in future slides. And really the drivers, at the time for the use of fund balance was PSERS. And while fund balance was increased in anticipation of PSERS increasing prior to 12-13, which was sort of a high water mark for fund balance, the increase, the amount of the increase in PSERS was greater than planned. So while I think the district did a nice job preparing for the incoming or the upcoming increase, they didn't prepare for it enough, and many people weren't able to as well. And I think that's just sort of the piece of a starting point. And the next slides will take a look at the actions taken by this group, how it mitigated that outcome and actually improved it significantly. So if we can go to the next slide. This is taking a look from 2013-14 through 2021. The green line is good, that's revenue. The red line is expenditures. And you can see that there was quite a gap in 13-14, 14-15, 15-16. Those were the deficits that I spoke about earlier and was drawing down or eroding our fund balance. And you can see, particularly in 16-17, that gap starts to narrow significantly and continues to narrow to where the last 2 years budgeted revenues and expenditures are the same. I think that really speaks to the amount of work that's taken place and the amount of effort by the district to improving its financial situation. It isn't just enough to take a look at how revenues and expenditures are tracking, because you saw in the prior graph up until this current year, it was increasing each year after year. Tends to be the case. PSERS is driven, contractual salary increases, health care, charter school costs outside the district. There are a number of drivers that increase expenditures. And revenue, the main driver that we have is the ability to increase taxes. So taking a look at how has our growth of revenues and expenditures over the time period 14-15 to 2021, what's that look like? You can see 16-17, again, was sort of a transitional year. Not only was there significant expenditure reductions, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but that was the one year the district did take advantage of the exception to the Act 1 index and increased above the index. So that's why you're seeing revenue growth exceeding expenditure significantly that year. But it's also why on the prior slides, in addition to reducing expenditures, why budgeted revenue and expenses eventually came together. And what's interesting is while both revenue and expenditures have been increasing, they're increasing at a declining rate. Over the last 3 years, let's just take a look at revenue, 1.66, 1.46. We actually reduced the expenditure projection for 2021 to 0.78. That is a function that essentially millage has been held flat. There was a modest increase in 18-19 for a capital plan for roofing, but other than that, we haven't increased taxes to cover operating expenses in the last 3 years, and that has been successful. We can then go to the next slide, which is actual versus budgeted performance. And the lower lighter blue is what we had budgeted as a deficit if it's below zero. The red line, and the black is what we actually performed in those years. And we can see that our actual has outperformed our budget in each of those years, but I want to share a little bit as far as some of the reasons for why were the actuals slightly better than the budgets in many of those cases. We did have a lot of one-time, non-recurring influences, which seems odd, but they were different over that period of time. Bond refunding, refinance is a different word for the same term. We did that in 14-15, 16-17, and 17-18. And each of those refunding had significant impact on the district finances. You know, adding several $100,000 to, I think in one case early on, about $1 million to revenue, which really helped offset the projected deficits in those particular years. In 16-17, and we'll talk a little bit more in a future slide, there was almost $3 million in deficit reduction. So while I mentioned earlier that we increased to above the Act 1 index, there was also $3 million of deficit reduction actions that took place as well. So it wasn't just increasing revenues to narrow that deficit, it was also decreasing expenditures. And then in 18-19, the surplus was largely attributable to Plan-Con subsidies, which had not been funded by the state for a number of years prior and were funded, and we received subsidies that were due from prior years during that period. It all came due. And then the two comments I want to mention is this graph currently ends at 18-19. 19-20, the fiscal year is currently being finalized. We do have the financial statements just about wrapped up. We'll be completing our annual financial report soon. When we get into probably January, this slide will be updated to reflect that. And I think the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is a very sort of unique circumstance due to COVID-19. 19-20 and 20-21 are really both intertwined because the impact of COVID due to the shutdown for maybe the last quarter of last year, 19-20, and the impact on revenues and expenditures this year for 2021 are all due to the influence to COVID. So it's helpful to understand, as opposed to looking at 1 year when we talk about 19-20, to take a look at it over a 2-year period because of the influence of COVID-19. Okay. The other thing that is a nice slide to take a look at is how is our fund balance, and which is probably the best indicator of our financial performance. And we can see a high watermark, if you will, at $12,000,003 and 12-13. You can see the significant decline, 13-14, 14-15, and 15-16. But then again, as I mentioned, because of the increase in revenue and the decrease in expenditures in 16-17, you start to see that erosion of fund balance level off. And then, again, for some of those one-time influences that we talked about in 18-19, we see the fund balance start to recover and replace some of what we had lost over the prior 5 years. The other thing that's worth keeping in mind for 18-19 is that growth that we saw, which is about 2.6 million, 948,000 of it is in non-spendable or prepaid fund balance. And what non-spendable or prepaid fund balance is healthcare. We pay healthcare a month in advance, and that is about what a monthly payment is. So while it shows up as fund balance, in accounting terms it's not money that's available for the district to spend. And then the next slide is just simply historical data. I'm not going to speak to that. It's just the data that I used to generate the prior graphs. And then down taking a look at some of the notes underneath it, bond refinance, 16-17 deficit reduction, and the 18-19 surplus. It's some added detail which explains the results that were shown on some of the earlier graphs. And with that, we're going to lead into a bit of a discussion on staffing and enrollment. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Walicki.
Thank you, Mr. Wismar. So this slide provides a historical view of our enrollment, our student enrollment, as well as, and we have the number of people, so this would be our instructional, our professional staff. So starting with the year 2008, 2009, we can see our student enrollment was 6,300. And where we are today in 2020, 2021, we're at 5,300. So over that 12-year span, we have reduced enrollment 1,073 students. So I think it's important to see at the same time, and salaries and benefits are one of the largest cost drivers for our budget. So we're able to see how staff have been attritioned over those years as well. We can see that over that same 12-year span, staff have been reduced, professional staff, by 64. There are 2 years that were really pivotal, and I think if you take a look back at the previous slides that Mr. Wismar was sharing, you'll see that there is a correlation between the years and where there were a large number of staff reduced, as well as the budget being more balanced. So those years in the 2015, 2016 year, the staff went from 429 to the following year to 413. So 16 staff members were reduced, and certainly attrition is the first means of looking at where are positions that, as individuals retire, that they are not replaced. There also may have been some furloughs that occurred at that time period. The next major time in which that again occurred is between 2017-18 to 2018-19, where again 10 staff members were reduced. So just in those few years, we have been able to reduce staff in order to better balance the budget while still meeting the needs of the district. That will move to the next slide.
Did you want to speak about the handout?
Oh, thank you. The handout that we provided to our board members and those present this evening, we felt the detail was too much to include in a slide. So in addition to our professional staff, we wanted to provide an overview. Now this provides from 2015-16 through the current year of all employee classifications. So minor changes, if any, through our administrators, our administrative support staff. Teachers is the detail that I just shared. Maintenance has remained primarily unchanged, as well as our custodians, and you can see the breakdown for 12-month and 10-month employees. Our secretaries do show a reduction from 29 to 17 between the years 17, 18, 18, 19, and this is whenever we reduced our 4-hour secretaries that were in our elementary buildings. We can see that paraprofessionals have remained primarily unchanged, along with building aides, nurse assistants. Food service looks like a major change in district employees because some of those individuals then became hired by Nutrition, Inc. So that was a shift from district employees to Nutrition, Inc. And then you can see in the year 2018-19, when 12 school police officers were added, and we can see that 5 of those are full-time with 7 being part-time. So again, we just felt this was another piece of the picture, piece of the puzzle as to where we have been and how, of course, this certainly impacts our budget development.
I think the one thing I'd like to add on the custodial side is where it looks fairly flat from 49 to 47. If you go back a couple years prior to that, the high water mark for custodians was 65. So there's been significant reduction to that group from a few prior years. Granted, there were 2 additional elementary schools at the time. There was East Hempfield, Bavard, but that's custodial staff has had the significant reduction prior to the period that we're looking at. And then what I have, and this slide was shared last year. This is our annual debt service. It shows that in 2026, that will be our last debt payment that we currently have, and it's half of what it would be in 2025. I think the importance for this year's budgetary considerations, or the upcoming year budgetary consideration, is what I have circled from 21 to 21, or to 2022, is almost a $700,000 increase in debt service. What's the reason for that? The effects of the prior bond refinances or refundings have worn off, and now we're back to more of a traditional debt service payment of what we had seen prior to the refundings. And you can see that it stays pretty stable between 9.7 million and 9.6 for the next 4 years before dropping off to 4.2. And where this becomes, I think, important is, especially when we get to the next slide, is we know that planning for either a high school renovation or rebuild is upcoming, that our accessibility to debt, our ability to take on additional debt, our borrowing capacity are all important factors in what we're able to do. And with that, we have shared a high school renovation rebuild timeline, and I'll defer to Dr. Walicki to talk you through these steps.
So an extensive demographic study was completed in November 2019, and this is due to concerns that we have with our declining enrollment, and it provides an opportunity for us to see if that is the picture that's going to continue. We had Shelby Stuman, who did an extensive review and shared with us that it looks like, I know the predictions were that our enrollment at some point here soon will level off. We are looking at asking the group to consider selecting a group to complete a feasibility study. And this is something we would recommend for January, which is only a few months away. And looking at where we will be in the previous slide that referred to our debt service, we really started with the end and started to look at where do we want to be and then working backwards. So a feasibility study will take approximately 1 year to complete. So if we were to look at starting in January 2021, that would take us until January 2022. The selection of an architect for the project design would then occur in January 2022. Now, these are all projected, but a timeline nonetheless for us to at least begin to move in this direction. The design phase will take a little longer, and that is predicted to be about 18 months. So we would have January 2022 through June of 2023. Then looking to begin construction, whether that's a renovation or a rebuild, which would be determined by the recommendations of the feasibility study, that would start in the fall of 2023, spring of 2024.
And the timing of this is very general, but it was information that was shared with us by the Foreman Group a number of years ago in terms of what you could expect in terms of timing. And I think the important thing I'd like to just interject or share in regards to the feasibility study, we would not be wanting to just do a feasibility study for the high school only. Must be considered for all district buildings. We would not want to expend all of our borrowing capacity on a high school project when there will be middle school or elementary needs down the road. A feasibility would project when those needs might occur, what the estimated costs might be, and consider that in what we would have available for borrowing for a high school project. Also keeping in mind our annual debt service payments so that we don't continue to struggle or strap the budget. And then the last slide, and these are just things to think about for the board to consider as we approach 21-22. We've spoke about resurfacing the high school track, and these are estimates that we've received from Nagel that does a lot of work in this area. Stadium athletic turf replacement, that is also an actual estimate that we've received from Nagel. And I do believe, information's been shared on both the track and stadium turf, as we're within a year or two of really needing to make the replacements or the improvements. The district feasibility study, if it is extensive and considers the entire district, I believe that was a number that I recall, again, from Foreman Group's presentation. And the design for the high school rebuild, that number came from Foreman, but the research I've done, it really is a percentage of the total project. So that's just a very raw number, and it shares the magnitude of the project. And that's one of the more difficult things to build into the bond issue, because the design has to come before you know how much you're going to spend for the project. So there's a little bit of a challenge there. Asphalt ceiling, we had done this a number of years ago. The districts are in need of it, or the district driveways and parking lots are in need of sealing and some repair work. That's just an estimate of what we, not an estimate, that's an actual cost of what we spent several years ago when we did it. The debt service increase, the $685,000 that I showed on an earlier slide, that's not a consideration, that's a reality. That we have to figure out. New curriculum adoptions. So there's instructional needs as well in these considerations or discussions as we build. And ELA, English Language Arts, is our most expensive adoption, new adoption, and the estimates that we have for that are $750,000. We typically budget around $500,000, and this is, above that.
Wayne, if I can interject, because we have already started what is referring to as a seed part of that ELA adoption. So in the current year, we spent, I believe, $250,000 thereabouts already for the initial startup of this program. So to continue with the next phase or complete implementation, it's going to require another $750,000. So that is common for ELA, and it is one of the most expensive adoptions.
The past expenditures for ELA adoption has been in the neighborhood of about $1 million. Projector replacement. Our projectors that we use for instruction in the classrooms are failing, they're wearing out, they're near their end of their useful life. If we were to replace each unit in the entire district, it would be about $500,000. Would not recommend doing them all at once. We would want to do it over a period of time, so you develop a replacement cycle, but it's included in there just to share the magnitude of that. And did want to share that we go back to 1819. A roof restoration plan was implemented by the board and was funded through a 1 mil increase in taxes. And since then, we've been able to restore 3 of our elementary building roofs. We've done Fort Allen, we've done West Point, we've done West Hempfield Elementary. We've extended the warranty for an additional 10 years at a third the cost of roof replacement. And roof restoration can be repeated multiple times. So by being a forward-thinking, by planning, we've positioned the district from a roofing perspective to be in good shape. And I think the point of mentioning that is just we, as a district, are moving more towards future planning as opposed to reacting, and I think that's a positive thing. So I think the message that I really wanted to share with the group today is, yes, there's some big considerations for the future, but the district has come a long way from when we first shared or first discussed this back in 14-15 and how dire the situation appeared then. I think the hard work that's been done has really paid off. And that's really, unless Dr. Walicki has anything to add, we could certainly open it up for questions if there are any.
I can just mention, I know with the feasibility study, we may have individuals reaching out to us and offering to do that for free. And I think something that has been stressed in all the programs and trainings that Mr. Wismar and I have attended is that, in life, seldom is there anything for free. And certainly it becomes a commitment then that they become the group that does the project. So we would recommend that we do an objective either an interview process where we could reach out and invite or open it up to see who would be interested, but really be very objective in that selection and be willing to pay for the feasibility study if it's going to, in the long run, provide us with that very objective information that we're going to need for the district as a whole.
And to piggyback on that, we went to several workshops last year in preparation for this, and what they said, to expand on that, is select a group to do the feasibility study, get your feasibility study, understand it, and then select a group to do the design. It may be the same, but don't piggyback those at the initial phase. If you separate it, and even if it ends up being the same group, but by separating them, you're going to end up with a better result.
Ready for
With that,
questions?
we'll be happy to take questions. And this presentation, we did send to you to email, and then I know that's something Brandon's able to share with the public at the same time.
So
Questions?
the public has it too. Okay, we'll go around the room in just 1 second, but if I might ask you, Wayne, you said the design for high school renovation rebuild 2.5 million, you said that was an estimate because it's based on a percent of the, what percent did you use?
I didn't. The 2.5.
Oh, you just came up with the number.
No, that was a number used by the Foreman Group several years ago in a presentation.
What did that reflect?
60 to 80 million dollars.
68 million, that's what I wanted to know. Okay, and we'll open up to board questions from everybody. Do we want to go around the room? Go ahead, Mike, you might as well go first, and we'll come around.
Thanks, Wayne. That was good. Jeez, oh man, sorry about that. So, our fixed costs, specifically with salaries and benefits, I think we talked a couple months ago about the PSERS number is pretty fluid. And I think, what are we at, 27% now?
35.
35. And does that continue, is it good? The last time we talked, we talked about a period where it's going to come down.
We're several years away from that. It's projected to continue to increase for the next several years.
Okay.
Not at the prior rates. We started, and I wish I could remember the actual year, but it was about 8.65, and it went to 12, it went to 16, then it went into the 20s. We're now at 35. It's projected to level off somewhere between 36 and 38%.
So it's more like 50. So, and then with the prepaid health care, we're at $948,000 a month.
Yes.
So that's $1,572 a month per employee. That's also a pretty fluid number.
It's actually pretty stable, and what I can share is our healthcare costs have actually gone down a little bit over the last several years for a couple reasons. The move from self-insured to ASHIC saved us about $300,000 in the first year that we made that transition. The other thing is that we have available an EPO and a PPO, and as more people choose the EPO, that's a little less cost to the district. We are seeing some reductions there, and that is total cost to the district. Keep in mind that 10% of that then is offset by employee contributions.
Okay. That's it for me.
That it, Mike?
Yeah,
Okay.
Mike's on.
Vince,
Only
before you,
question-
before you start, Vince, would you mind just real quickly, he asked about PSERS, and maybe in the public, they're not real sure of the percentage and why we're at that and what it is.
It's the Pennsylvania State Employees Retirement System. Anyone that is in the system for a defined period of time is vested and becomes eligible for a defined retirement plan. Yes, it has been changed or revised in recent years to, from 5 years, it takes 10 years vesting. It's gone from a purely defined retirement to a optional plan of where it's partially defined, partially 401k, or all 401k. And the reason we've been told for the precipitous increase over time is the unfunded liability has increased. Well, what caused that was the plan was enriched. It went from 2% to 2.5% on the multiplier. For some folks at the state level, it went from 2.5 to 3. And there was also, during when the housing bubble burst, there was a period of time where the returns needed to fund the program weren't realized. They operate, I believe, on an 8% return model, and for a period of time, they did not receive that. They were also instructed back when it was fully funded by outside consultants, auditors, that they had too much, and that is when the plan was enhanced or enriched. And I believe that was back in the 90s? Late 90s. So it continues to be one of the most significant drivers and one of the most significant challenges. We had gone from, and this is just recollection, from spending roughly $4 million a year on retirement as part of our budget to being between 8 and 10 million a year.
Okay, I just wanted the public to make sure they had that information. Thank you, Wayne.
It was fully funded Last year, for the first, just for the span of 1 year, for the first time in recent history, yes, it's still underfunded, but the percentage that it's underfunded is improving.
Okay. Vince, your floor.
The only question I have is, did we get hard numbers on the stadium, the turf? Is that why?
Yes.
Because last year it was like 600, we went down to like.
This was from Nagel,
Perfect,
and just
so-
recently. And there's actually several options in the quote that we have.
Okay,
The one thing I would caution is just to make sure that we have turf comparable to what's there, because the quality of what's out there is very good and is held up quite well. So I don't think we would want to be cautious to make sure we get a comparable product.
that's the same thing with the track as well?
The track is a hard number.
Okay.
And that
Those went down a little bit from last year.
Yes.
Okay.
And we actually, it was Nagel come in, and we actually wanted to get some firmer numbers as we started to discuss for 21, 22. And there's the ranges there, Vince, because we're not sure when we get down if we have to do any milling and replacement of the asphalt, or if we can just go down to the base and build back up. But this is not just putting a top layer on, this is a true renovation.
That's all I have for now, thanks.
Thanks, Vince. Dr. Jeannie?
I think we've done a tremendous job in the last couple years. I do. I think I'm so pleased that we've come together with those lines, and that's what we were attempting to do. One of the concerns that I have, maybe I should ask this first, is there any way that we can refinance any bonds now since the interest rate is so low?
We only have one small bond left that could be refunded, and we're holding on to that for the high school project, the renovation or rebuild. That would be when we would refund and bring in new money.
Okay.
So we're keeping it open for that
I
purpose.
remember them talking about that.
And the other thing, I think, and I mean, knocking on wood a little bit, interest rates are running about 2%. They're very low. And the estimates that I have received from talking with Tim Frentz at Janney is that they anticipate that holding for a little while yet.
Yes. Okay, and then my concern is that we're looking at big projects, and we've talked about this before, that when we do the renovation, could be folded into the renovation.
I think we're at a point, particularly with the track and the turf,
know.
we can't wait.
I know. Can we move up the escalate? Can we escalate the building of the high school?
The timeline that was shared is really cutting it
Very
tight.
aggressive.
But when they came and talked to us, the bond issue people, they said we could
But we wouldn't.
accelerate that a couple years by redoing what you were talking about with that bond.
Right. It's not financing, it's the time to complete the feasibility study, the time to complete the design phase. And you really can't issue a bond until the design phase is completed, knowing how much you're going to need.
I mean, and we've struggled with this for years, of spending money that could be rolled into this, and then will we have to redo anything?
I think, there is a defined life cycle on turf anyway. So whether we do it now or in a year from now, it'll need to be redone in 8 to 10 years anyway. The track, you'll get a full another life of probably 18 to 20 years out of our renovation there. So these aren't things that you'll be redoing soon. And I think there's some value that I mentioned about with the projectors of trying to spread things out so you're not hit with these costs all at one time. And I think particularly the great example of that is the roofs, is being able to handle that through operating funds as opposed to bond issues, which we've done in the past. I believe one of the projects we did in the past, we did many roofs within the district with a bond issue. We are not now needing to do a bond issue. We're able to do it through operating funds. So I think if we can do a mix of capital bond issue and a mix of operating, it holds debt service down. It's sort of maybe the best of both worlds.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeannie. Paul?
I guess the one note I had made when you were talking about PESERs, just to clarify for anybody who's listening, that PESERs, we have no control over PESERs, and maybe you already said that, but I think it's worth highlighting that.
I did not, and you're absolutely correct. And we have heard comments from members of the public, well, why don't you just do away with it? It's a state mandate. It's nothing that we have any control over. The rates are nothing we have control over. It's just something that we have to work within. That's a great point.
And even with the negotiating a contract with the teachers, that's not part of that. That's outside of
It's
that.
non-negotiable.
So I just want to clarify that point.
No, great point.
And then the other thing, I guess, was just, the biggest thing for me was with the interest rates where they are now, if there's anything we can do. And we also don't want to rush this project and do it in a bad way, but anything we can do to take advantage of it.
I think we keep a pulse on rates, and we do have some good contacts that we worked with. Alicia Henry, who's now with PNC Capital, Tim Frentz, who's with Janney. We do have some good resources that keep us apprised of movements or stability in those market rates.
And then the other question, I guess, is on the timeline you gave, construction begin fall of 2023 to spring of 2024. Does that mean that that's the beginning period? That's not the full build period.
That's break ground.
That's break ground within that period. But how long will it actually take to build, do we think?
Depends on renovation or
Oh,
build.
that's true. That's true.
Actually, build is quicker. Build is probably about 2 years. Renovation is between 2 and 3.
I just wanted, because when I first saw construction begin fall of 2023 to spring of 2020, I thought you were saying we're going to build the school in 6 months.
No, and actually, why I put that in there is let's say we have
No,
the money and we're ready to, we may not be able to break ground in the fall. The weather
Right.
may not be conducive. We might have to wait till spring to break ground. That was just the purpose of that range.
Plus, I guess if we're thinking like Jeannie said about the field, like say the stadium, waiting, because I would think you're not going to replace the turf at the beginning of construction, maybe as there's a lot of dirt and a lot of things going on in the air. So the project wouldn't be completed until 2026 or so. So that's another 6 years
And
between now
it
and then.
won't last that long.
Right. Oh, no, it probably won't last.
And actually,
Half of
what
that.
would be, and I didn't mention this earlier when Vince asked, we would recommend, from what we've looked at, doing the track and the turf at the same time, so as to only disturb the grounds once, as opposed to disturb, one and then risk damaging one that you've already done.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Scott?
I guess my statement's more like a point of clarification for the fund balance. A lot of people out there, I know we made it available to the public, but, and we've had numerous people come in to address our board and administrators about the fund balance, and I think we've done a great job even before I got on the board, but I think, you can see the transition up to having a decent fund balance, but some people will think of that like it's like just sitting in a bank account somewhere, like a checkbook, like your personal checkbook, but in talking about the building of the school and looking at the renovations or new school, this fund balance acts, the ratings companies actually look at this as a means of basically like your personal credit score. So when we go to borrow money, we're apt to get a better percentage rate than we would if we didn't have a fund balance. And with a budget our size, we have to keep a significant amount of money in the fund balance. So I don't want people out there looking at it saying, well, they're sitting on all this pile of money, because it gets said in public all the time, but that's not how business works. So I just wanted to clarify that, and we're doing a great job by keeping that so we can borrow money at a lower rate. It's like somebody borrowing a car. If you don't have a good credit score, you're going to pay 20-25% interest, where
That's a great point, and that has actually been shared with us. As we had seen a decline in our fund balance over that 5-year period, our rating actually did experience a bit of a decrease. It has stabilized, and I think with some of the last year's, 2 years ago results, and we're expecting decent results for last year, we may see that return. And there actually, Tim Frentz, last time he was in, shared what the cost of that rating decrease would be. That's absolutely correct. And the other thing, would just expand on it a little bit, is while that fund balance seems very large, in a budget our size, that amounts to about a month's worth of expenses. And one thing I'll share too is when we went back through it, the 267 days of no state budget, that fund balance enabled us to continue to pay our employees, continued to allow us to pay our bills, and we didn't have to borrow money. We were one of the districts that didn't have to take an anticipation note because we did have enough fund balance to carry us through. So those are both good points.
Anything else, Scott?
No.
Jennifer, do you have any questions?
And, rebuilding and, we're dealing with COVID, have you put that into consideration?
Well, we would not be looking at rebuilding within the next several years. A feasibility study would take a year to complete. A majority of that would be done either on-site through on-site visits, and most of the work could be done off-site for the feasibility portion of it. The design phase is another probably 18 months to 2 years. We would be a good 3 years down the road before we would be in a position to even consider breaking ground. Would hope that there's a vaccination or something in place to mitigate COVID by then.
Anything else, Jennifer? Diane?
I don't have any questions. I just have a statement that was a very good and thorough report. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a very, very good report, Wayne and Tammy, and I appreciate the report you did when we first got on the board in January, and you pointed out a lot of the maintenance issues you were doing yearly, which takes away from this, which you alluded to with the roofs.
Yes.
So I had a couple questions about that. When we did the buildings plans years ago, 20 years ago or 22 years ago, I think we started, our major stumbling block then was they were all coming to needing done all at the same time. And if we did them all at the same time, which we did, then they're all coming again all at the same time. But the one thing were the roofs, and we put new roofs on them when we did those. And you're talking Fort Allen, and what was the other school?
Fort Allen, West Point, and West Hempfield Elementary.
All of them had new roofs like around the turn of the century.
Yes, they had,
A couple of them were after the turn of the century.
a couple of them had, their warranty had expired, but by doing the restoration, we're able to get them back and extend the warranty for an additional 10 years.
So we put on a roof on our house and it's 25-year shingles or 20-year shingles or 30-year shingles, but we do flat roofs and they're 10-year.
Well,
I mean, we're not even 20 years away from these renovations.
these were originally 25 years.
Right, and we did them in 17. I mean, a lot less than 25 years. What my point is, the roofs were put on 17, 20 years ago.
No, they were put on 25. They were exceeding, they were getting to the end of their warranty period, yes. They were over 20 years,
I thought we put them on when we did the renovations the last time.
which was,
That's why I said around the turn of the century. Maybe, I might have the years off, but I'd like to look at that. Not that it matters, except I'd like to know, because it just seems with the flat roofs, they don't last near as what you think, and I know not all of them are flat.
well, but it actually, what this does, at about the third of a cost of a new roof, so each time
You get the extended
you
warranty.
get 10 years extended. So over 30 years, you're going to get a 30-year warranty if you restore 3 times.
Right. At some point, I'd like to see, without a lot of work, figures on that, to see how not that you're doing something wrong, but the companies. I mean, we fought with them to get them repaired. We had buckets everywhere. They were leaking all over the place. It was way under the extension. In fact, that gymnasium, the field house we put in, it leaked from the day we put it in. And there were buckets everywhere, and I think it's still leaking, isn't it, at points?
Well, what I can share is we have had a lot of this building repaired over the last year at no cost to the district under warranty. Apparently, there were some issues with some of the underlayment material that they used originally, and they've spent a good part of the last 2 years replacing a significant part of the square footage on this building.
of the roofs that they did and they didn't do it properly.
That there was an issue with the materials, yes.
Okay. But that brings me to the budget then, in the capital projects section you had.
Yes.
A lot of those items, I don't know, in my business, you know, and God love you because you were doing things that weren't being done before when you're doing the maintenance. But some of these things, like even the turf, we'll go to the asphalt sealing of all the driveways and that. We don't set money aside each year knowing we're going to have that coming up, correct?
We have not had it. We've been trying to work towards that. What we have been able to do is the amount of maintenance that we're able to do in terms of preventive maintenance and repairs, that's certainly increased.
Right.
I'm not saying that we couldn't possibly come up with this in next year's budget, but it would be a large item that might then take the place of some other projects, smaller projects.
Well, there are a lot of issues that go into it. Even when you amass money, then it's seen that you have money. Then
Yes.
negotiations, everything else, are a little bit
Absolutely.
more difficult too. And I get that. But at some point in time, we as a board need to be challenged to try and set maybe a line item aside to put into capital projects that can just keep on rolling over each year, because the asphalt ceiling, the track, the field surface, we knew when we put it in, it was gonna be $500 in 10 years we had to put into it. And that's 50, I'm talking about when we did it initially. That's $50,000 a year we should have been putting aside, but it just seems always you're trying to cut as much as you possibly can for various reasons, not just what I spoke of a minute ago, but also because we don't want to raise taxes. But at some point in time, we've got to be able to have the money so we don't have to look at these projects and then looking from behind, trying to borrow from Peter to pay Paul then.
And I think that's a great point, and that's one of the things this board did in 1819, was set aside money for the roof restorations, and not increasing it just for operating costs. You know, what was increased was for a designated purpose, much like you speak of.
Okay, and then the fund balance, what percent is a good percentage to keep of your total budget in fund balance?
The only real direction is for unassigned,
Okay.
which means just money just sitting there that can be spent easily, is between 5% and 8%.
And that's based on as if there's something out of the ordinary hits you, you'll have it.
Yes.
Like COVID.
COVID is a perfect example. What this district has done and what most districts do if they're able to get above that 5% or 8% is they commit funds. And committing funds requires board action to either expend or to move or change.
Right.
Currently, we have $5 million committed towards health care and employee benefits, which would be PSERS. So there is some of the fund balance currently designated for those purposes.
Which puts you in the 5 to 8% amount.
Yes.
Right. Okay, and my last question, two, arbitrage, is that around still, if we would borrow money early and put it
Yes.
somewhere, we would still have to worry about arbitrage, which
Yes.
is payment if we're making money on money we borrowed,
Yes.
correct? And then if we do build and rebuild, it'd be a little bit easier too, because you can house the population in here while you're rebuilding on a new footprint.
And that was one of the comments that was shared with us, and I believe it's accurate, is renovation with students in the building is much more challenging because you have spaces that are closed off, you have to move them, create new spaces. If you're able to house them in the existing and build new, it's faster
Right.
and less, less disruptive.
Right, exactly. And, yeah, that's it. The student reps that are in here, do you have any questions on the building that we might be doing? Anything?
No, I just wish we were, we got to see the new building come alive.
You'll get to pay for it after you graduate college and come back.
Even better.
And knowing you, Jake, you'd love to be doing that anyway. I'm sure you would too, Nick. Board members, any follow-up questions? Okay, thank you. Really a good report. I appreciate it.
We have two additional parts to the report. The second is an update in regards to our attendance committee meeting. So we did schedule I'll say a small committee. Representing our school board, we had Jennifer Bretz, Diane Cibatoni, Dr. Jeannie Smith. Paul Ward was unable to attend. Our teachers in attendance, and I'll share their schools as well because this represented our secondary, We had William Barch for Harold Middle, Tom Bielik for the high school, Joanne Hervel High School, Andrea Hoke, Harold, Darcy Markovic is our home and school visitor, so she services all schools. Tammy Marshall, Wendover, Quinn Matz, West Hempfield Middle, Jamie Smith, West Hempfield Middle, and Ashley Testa is assigned to the high school and currently working across all. And then, of course, administrators, Dr. Connor, Dr. Riefanak, myself, Dr. Maloney, Deanna McKessick represented the middle school, and Mr. Saraceni represented the high school. So we held a virtual meeting last week and in regards to attendance. And it was, I'm going to say it was very eye-opening for me. There were a lot of strong opinions in regards to how it's currently going and taking student attendance. And the one word that I took away was overwhelming. Our secondary teachers shared that the task of taking attendance is consuming much, unfortunately, instructional time as well as time beyond the workday. I know one of the teachers shared his grade book, and a frustration for our teachers is when students do not participate on their virtual day synchronously. They talked about how they felt that the quality of the education is not the same. A student merely watching a recording of a lesson at a later time does not provide that opportunity for the teacher to check for understanding, for the student to ask questions, and they felt that there was a much higher quality education provided when students participate synchronously on their virtual day. We also talked about course failures, and unfortunately with just ending the first quarter, we were able to review our course failures, and we do have a larger number of students failing courses than we had at the same time last year. And as the teachers were sharing their perspectives, they related that back to the students who are not participating in the synchronous lessons. We talked about attendance in regards to being the completion of an activity, which currently if a student participates in an asynchronous lesson, that means not in real time, and they submit some form of an activity, it was not always of quality, to where the teacher shared some examples where sometimes things that are submitted are incorrect or irrelevant. There was also discussion in regards to how difficult it is for an activity to be completed in some classes, such as an art class where they're learning to work with clay. That's impossible to do in a virtual setting. Cutting wood in a technology class. So we talked about attendance as an early warning, the means to monitor attendance. We have a home and school visitor who shared that sometimes she's called upon to provide some supports and services to students, but when she pulls up their attendance, it appears as though they have not missed any days because they're not participating synchronously. They may just be submitting something to be coded as present, and then what's happening is they're not getting the support that they need. They talked about how difficult it is for students moving in and out of instructional models. And what we mean by that are students who maybe are today in the hybrid model, attending every other day AB, but then next week they choose to go to HACA, our cyber program, and they may do that for 2 weeks and then decide they're coming back. So for the teachers, the secondary on the committee, there was consensus in regards to how challenging that is, and really we need to create, and I think Dr. Riefanak termed it almost like whenever you do your insurance, or your healthcare, you have open enrollment windows. So we want to take a look at that as we move forward. We realize in getting started in this process there are some areas that we can improve, and a way that we can better support our teachers and our students is to ask parents to commit to those instructional models so that we don't have that constant changing back and forth. But the recommendations of the committee are that we consider attendance separate from work completion. So we feel, again, students benefit the most when they are either present physically, or if it is their virtual day, if they participate synchronously. And we talked about attendance as what does it mean to be present, and present is being physically here on your assigned day, or being on the computer synchronously if it's your virtual day. I know of examples of many teachers who have worked so hard to make that lesson engaging. Teaching is not just giving an assignment. Teaching is having students work with one another, having students work with the teacher, providing feedback, checking for understanding. So that requires the student to participate in real time. The recommendations are that we continue to code students as absent if they do not attend school on the days in which they are scheduled to attend in person. An absence just means that they weren't physically present, but certainly they can still submit work as they did in the past. A student who does not participate in synchronous learning on the assigned virtual day would be considered absent. That work completion is separate from attendance. And again, students, just as in the past, they could submit work for days that they miss, and certainly having access to those recordings from an asynchronous lesson permits them to do that. And then the commitment to an instructional model until a designated period of time, that would certainly be helpful in monitoring. So our committee had one meeting. These notes that I just shared were generated following the meeting and then shared with all of the committee members. So certainly we were hearing from the teachers that this would reduce the time that's being spent on taking attendance and allow that time to better be utilized for the purpose of instruction. And it's also felt it will reduce the number of students failing courses. Now that does mean that we're looking at making recommended changes to our administrative regulation. And we realize that for some students, they are able to miss a class and complete work. But as we're looking at an administrative regulation connected to our policy, we're looking at what is a best practice for the majority of students. And that's where the committee, in coming away and saying these would be some changes that would allow our students to achieve better in a virtual environment.
Question?
Questions?
Before we move on, I did have a question, and I tried to listen to that, and it seemed really complete what you're all doing. But I thought this meeting and the review of it was specific, almost specific to the students who are being held at home because of recommendations from the administration, school board, and the teachers. Hold them at home if they have a sore throat or if they have a cold, and it's not COVID. You'd normally send them, but don't send them now. And then they don't send them now, they get on synchronously, and then they're marked absent. That is going to continue?
So yes, we are looking, because they are absent. On their assigned day in class, they are not present.
Well, then
So
they ought to
would be-
send their kid to school.
But we have increased the number of days, and an absence is not a bad thing. A student not being in school, they still have access to the instruction as you shared synchronously. So it's still that they are to be physically present and they're not, they can still engage in the work because they're still going to earn the credit for completing the work. So their grades will be better if they participate synchronously.
Wasn't there going to be a different coding of that?
So as we talked about the codes, that creates another layer to something that's already very
Oh,
challenging.
that's right.
So to have the teachers do an additional code, you're right, that had come up in the discussion at one point, and then it became, well, now we're just making it even more complicated.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it really narrows down to, are they present or are they absent?
Okay, Diane, more questions? If not, we'll move to Jen.
No.
Okay,
No more
Jennifer? Scott? Paul?
No, I don't have anything.
Jeannie?
One of the things that did come up was perhaps trying to find a way to help alleviate some of that burden of attendance. And
Yes.
I didn't know if we looked into any of that or not.
So, yes, one of the, we will be looking into, we're always looking at how can technology support and help teachers. What we want to be cautious of is not having a student merely logging in at the beginning of the lesson, counting as though they are now present. The expectation will be that they will do something. So yes, we can use LessonBot to determine whether a student logged into that lesson or not, but we don't want to consider that as being then present synchronously, because just turning it on and having your computer running doesn't mean that you're benefiting from that instruction. So we are looking at how can we continue to use that as a tool, maybe as a first line, but we still want the teacher to be, as they are, calling upon students, checking for understanding, doing those exit tickets kinds of things in real time so that they're able to verify that and check for understanding.
Is that good, Jean?
That's all.
Okay, Vince?
I don't like the being marked absent. I know it's difficult, but I know my thing is I think there's kids that take pride in not missing class. And in the COVID era, I don't think it's a good situation to send your kid if he has a sore throat, but I also don't think they should be marked absent.
Mike?
Thank you.
So based on the AB, this microphone, based on the AB schedule, to sum it up, I think, is if you're scheduled to be in class when you're at home, and then you come to school on your in-school day, at the end of the year, you're not going to have 30% absent days, right?
Correct.
Okay, so to sum it up, if you're supposed to be getting your education, just do it, whether you're in the brick and mortar or in front of your computer.
Correct.
And the gray area is coming in whenever we can't verify, but I think we can verify it if the scores or if some of the passing rates are down. So ideally, I guess to make my point, ideally, if the student is supposed to be in school, whether it's in front of their computer or in brick and mortar, we don't have to worry about having an accumulation of absent days.
That's correct. Our absenteeism is very low, but we feel that is inflated. It's not accurate of the engagement of students.
But my point is, there's no student, if they attend school, whether it's virtually on that day or in brick and mortar that day, at the end of the year, if they have passing grades and they have completed their courses, they aren't going to have an asterisk beside their name saying they missed 40 days of school that year.
They would be given credit for the days that they're
Yeah.
participating, right? And two, keep in mind, the teachers plan for the days when students are to be physically in front of them, and sometimes there are things that you just can't do at home. So therefore, it is important for students, when they're feeling well, to come to school. But if they're not feeling well, we don't want them to come to school, and certainly we are being more lenient with the number of absences, and they can be excused absences because they're having symptoms, but we want them to be taking advantage of every day that they are to come to school when they're feeling well.
Any other board
I
questions? Jeannie?
wanted to ask a question because I thought of this after we had our meeting. I was a little confused because we talked about possibly requiring synchronous learning with the AB
Yes.
students. And I thought that was what we expected, that they, in other words, that they could, if something came up that they couldn't, or perhaps they were watching brothers and sisters because parents had to work and they were helping them on the, virtual, they could watch it asynchronously. But I thought our expectation was, if at all possible, we did expect them to attend, because I believe that the teachers are then, if they're not there, sending the parents a notification and the students saying, why didn't you sign into class today?
So I think the way that it was worded, we highly recommended, and what we are saying now is, yes, we want to make it an expectation that they participate synchronously, because the teachers are reaching out. I know the teacher that was on the call with us, I think we heard the large number of calls that he's making, and I think until you have accumulated a number of days where they're not participating, or if a student is merely turning in an assignment, then the teacher's marking them as present. So then those calls aren't being made because the student is submitting work, but I think we all heard examples of work that is poor quality or irrelevant. So I think those are all the things that we want to avoid. So we do want to change the language, and here, now that we're starting into a new second marking period, we felt this would be a good time to make a change. And then just with everything else, we have to monitor it to see how effective is that. I do think it'll make it much easier for teachers if attendance is in real time, if it's who's in front of me and doing roll call for who's online, and attendance is done for that class period. And you still expect students to submit work. That's no different than in a normal year.
Good. Paul?
A question, but a quick comment first. I think this highlights that the concern we have with just the online learning has its limits, no matter how good the district, you've done a great job, the administration has done a great job, but there are limitations to the online learning, which is the concern we've had about trying to get back as quickly as possible. But I guess the question I would have is, have you seen that this has gotten worse as time has gone on, sort of like the COVID fatigue? Initially maybe it's if it's a short-term thing, you can get through it and they can keep some energy up, but as time goes on, this started at the end of August, so we're almost 3 months into it. You would think as time goes on, this might be getting a little worse to stay engaged online.
I think the number of our students who have moved into total cyber, would show that we have some students that are finding this actually to be a means of learning with which they're very comfortable. I know we had, and I don't have the exact numbers, Dr. Connor, I don't want to put you on the spot if you have them. We were curious to watch the numbers following our board meeting when we decided that we were going to remain open or on our hybrid model. The number of students that moved at that point over to cyber. About 40-some students at the secondary level. So I think for some students, I think they are finding it to be engaging because I think the teachers are not merely posting assignments. They are having them work in groups. They're using the Google Meets for breakout groups. They're, giving them engaging activities to do. And we watched a Socratic seminar that was held in one classroom where, the students were certainly using the chat to converse with one another. So I think our teachers are doing a phenomenal job in making it engaging. And that fact that it's every other day, too, I think reduces that. And it's not solely on the computer unless they've chosen that path. And we have many students that have chosen that path.
Okay. I was just
Question.
curious.
Yeah, good
Thank you.
question. So this leads into the third and final part of the superintendent's report. It's a little long tonight. I
Can I make one
apologize.
statement on that?
Sure.
Because you caught me looking at the agenda, Don.
Sorry.
I agree a lot with what Vince is saying. I really understand the problem for the administration, and I hope the parents out there do too. This is a really tough time with COVID. I mean, used to be we would give awards for good attendance and
We're
perfect
not doing
attendance.
that, right.
Nothing's happening like that now. In fact, we're giving rewards. If your child has a stuffy nose, you keep him home because he might get someone else sick, or it could be COVID. But by the way, when you take him home, we're also going to mark him absent. This is a tough situation. I understand the thought process on what you're saying, and I'm not trying as a board member to come here and say, don't do what you're doing, because I don't do it each day as you do. And I understand it's very challenging for the teachers, but I also think it's very unfair to the students. Because I know people who work and go to work, when they go, they like being at work, they like working, and they go sick. But with COVID, I understand we don't want them here with all the children. So that's really a tough decision to make. But I firmly believe if we're going to do it for people that are quarantining, we should be doing it for students that legitimately are taking off only because of COVID and they are a little under the weather with something else. And that's how I feel, and I just want to make that known. And whatever can be done, do, but we can go from there, so.
So a student who is off for an extended absence are students that we do make those exceptions for. And I know Dr. Maloney's with us this evening because she can speak to the number of students that we do provide that extended absence because they're either being tested or they're in close contact with a family member who's been tested as positive. So our teachers are, that's another complex piece of this, continuously being made aware of who are the students that are being quarantined and getting their work together and not counting them as absent. I know you have the figures as of today, Dr. Maloney, for how many students that involves that are being quarantined.
Do you want me to go over them right now?
Be good.
So right now we have 70 students out who are on an extended absence for quarantine. 55 of those are DOH quarantine, which means that they're out for a duration of time due to a known exposure, either in their household or somewhere in the community or even here at school. And then we have another 15 students currently who are in the process of being tested. We stopped quarantining whole families when one person in the house was getting tested because it was just too large of a volume of people to track, and Department of Health does not recommend that, so we kind of went to just the person being tested is the person quarantined. However, we do have doctors, out of an abundance of caution, if the child is very symptomatic, they'll ask the whole family to quarantine. So we have a couple of those, not many, but most of them we're waiting on testing, and like I said, about 55 across the district who are in extended absence, and some of those absences are for up to 24 days. If it's a household member and the child's not showing symptoms, it is a 24-day quarantine. So,
Will you, since you're speaking, I'll call upon you again, will you share our tracker and the new line that we added today? I'll display it on the screen. So this is on our district website. So we have decided to discontinue sending letters every time we were finding we were sending them nearly daily
yeah.
as we have cases. So we did start a COVID-19 tracker, which is on the district website.
So what we've noticed this past week. By that, I mean today. I have a large volume of people, children who are being quarantined, and if you have a known exposure, even if it's not a household member, but you are deemed a close contact by Department of Health, and you have 2 or more symptoms, you are what Department of Health would call a presumptive positive case. They treat presumptive positive cases the same as they treat positive cases. So if you were in school during the time before like the 48 hours before you showed symptoms, we would have to contact trace. So that's just, it's more students who we are quarantining or we're having contact tracing with. So we thought it would be more transparent to include those students in our presentation of the numbers. We haven't had many of these so far. We had maybe one right before we had the high school shutdown, and then any of the others, maybe 1 or 2, have turned into positive cases anyway. So I think it's just important to just to indicate that and not just to explain what that is.
Thank you, Dr. Maloney.
Welcome.
But all those are they're not marked as absent.
Correct. The 70 students that were referenced for being quarantined are not marked as absent.
See, and that's the thing I'm talking about, and there's not a big discussion with that, because not anything you can do about it, and that's the Department of Health coming down with it, correct? With the quarantines, for most cases.
Department of Health sets the quarantines.
Yeah, exactly, and we're following those by saying they're not marked absent, and a lot of times these things are arbitrary. I mean, one of my grandsons was marked as quarantined, no one else in the family, as you said, was, because they didn't want to do that. But I mean, it's a hodgepodge of stuff that's being thrown out there with COVID, and we're asking our parents, hold your kids back if they have any symptoms, without any doctor saying, well, we'll hold them out if he has 2 or more symptoms, presumptive COVID. Well, if they'd have done that, then they wouldn't be marked absent. And some of these people, like Vince said, they have pride in the fact that they're in school all the time. And I just think it's extremely unfair if the parent is being very proactive to keep their kid out with the sniffles or whatever it might be, a scratchy throat, just to be part of the solution rather than the problem, and we mark them absent, where they would have been going to school any other time. So I'm just voicing my concern. My concern is that, and I think it's not fair, although I do understand it would be a lot of work for everybody. So, and you can move on, because we'll be here till midnight if I keep going.
Tony,
Yes.
the one thing, in normal times, a lot of parents keep their kids home because they have the sniffles or a sore throat, excuse me, and they're marked absent. And I understand exactly what you're saying, but I think one of the main things is that they need to be in class, either virtually or in-house
Correct.
whenever they're supposed to be here. And I think that some of the kids have just gotten a little lax. So I think that's a big thing. But also the grades are really, that's a major problem. And I think parents would rather their children be marked absent than have a bad grade.
I don't understand the correlation, though. The reason I don't, Diane, is this. I don't think the correlation of a bad grade and a student that's being held out proactively by their parents is a good student that wants to be here. And that student's high performing. And you can't compare them with students that just say, well, I'm staying out, I'll do virtual, and didn't do the virtual. But if they do the virtual, and they're being held out proactively, and they do the virtual, they get shafted because they're still doing the virtual, and they're intending, and they're doing their work, but they're still being marked absent. You understand what I mean? So I don't think that's, I respect what you're saying, but I don't agree with that
Well, they
explanation.
say one of the reasons for the poor grades is because of the attendance, the children not being there.
I get that.
So I mean, I think that's another thing that they are trying to improve.
I'm not, Diane, and all of you, I'm not disagreeing that this is monumental for
I
them,
know,
and they're
it's-
not doing
yeah.
the very best that they could possibly do. I am saying that fact does not go away from the fact that these people are holding their child out. They're making their child do virtual. They're not one of the ones that are not coming to school and not going virtual and having bad grades. These are kids that want to perform. They want to be in school. And they would be on a normal year because they have a little cold or a little sore throat. They're going to be at school. But now they can't.
But these parents would normally be the ones who would keep their children home if they had a slight cold or something, just because they are caring parents and they don't want to spread anything before we got to even this disease.
Right, but in normal,
So-
I don't know about
I agree with what you're saying, but in normal times, you don't have the ability to sit home and watch class at the same time either. So last year, you didn't have that ability, but now you do. So if you're gonna sit home with the sniffles and watch class and participate, which a lesson bot allows us to do, then why would you be marked absent? That's not the same as last year when your kid had the sniffles and you left your kid home, he had to sit there. But this year, you can watch class and participate. So that's why I don't think you should be marked absent. Now, there are cases, I understand, there's people that'll take advantage of it, but I
That's
think
the
we need to,
problem.
I don't think I don't think the good people should be penalized for the bad. There's probably a saying for that, but I don't know what it is right now.
We did talk about, I know one school district marks the students, I think PO, meaning they're present online. And we did talk about possibly doing that, and maybe since several people here feel so strongly about it, we could, at our next meeting, revisit and discuss it again.
We can, and our teachers currently do keep records of which students are participating virtually. So then it still comes down to then, do we consider that as being present or in absence? So I think it is looking at developing, policy has to address the majority. And while we're talking about probably some of the exceptions, we want to present what would be a best practice for the majority of the students. And I think that's where, in listening to the teachers, they were overwhelmingly saying that, you know, whenever you think about that student who has the sniffles and is staying home, they're really not, you know, the art class that they can't work with the clay, the class with the wood, you know, there are so many activities that it's just not the same experience. So I think that's where it's really looking at, you know, is an absence, and how many times in the year, you know, do you have the sniffles that you're staying home? I mean, we're probably looking at, we still offer, instead of 10 days, 15 days to where that's not an issue. And they're still being given credit for the work that they're completing because it's an excused absence. But we will reconvene the committee, and I'm sure many of them, if they are not listening, we can provide them with an overview of the comments that we heard this evening and then come together to make revisions to the administrative regulations.
And I think it's a good time with us doing the virtual that you do revisit policy and get it the way you want it for the future, because we're going to use the virtual forever, and it'll be a good thing. And don't forget, people have seasonal allergies too, where they're not sick at all.
Right.
And they have sniffles and scratchy throats and things, and now they're holding them home. So normally, they would be in school. But anyway, it's
So-
only a couple of us, so go ahead.
So it really leads into the third part, because as we're looking at the middle schools, I know we have heard from the board that there's interest in, you know, looking at when can we bring all students back, and certainly that's something that Dr. Connor and I will share the work that's been done to date. This information that we're talking about in regards to attendance certainly impacts that specifically, because as we're looking at what options would parents have, I know the survey that was sent out provided the option for parents either to have their child come back to school every day or to go virtual. We have some parents asking for the hybrid model to continue to be an option at the middle school. And that's something, if we're going to require that then they participate synchronously, we want that to be known from the start so that parents know what it is that they are committing to. So with that lead in, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Connor, because I'm sure I probably took some of what you were going to say. I apologize.
That's quite all right. I appreciate it. So I think the theme that we've heard over the last couple presentations, except for Wayne's, is that what's best practice for the majority of students is not necessarily what's best practice for all. And the middle school principals and I received a lot of feedback from parents saying, you're narrowing us down with just the two choices from the survey, and that my son or daughter is doing quite well with the hybrid model right now. So why are you forcing them into school based on this? The survey was to conclude this past Friday. I left it on until today. Unfortunately, we've had 797 responses out of a total of 1,285, which is only a 62% return rate. But based on that return rate, the middle school principals, myself, Dr. Willicke, have been meeting at a regular fashion to continue to look at planning for the reopening of the middle schools. But with the attendance issue, as Dr. Walicki just mentioned, I think that has some other things that we need to consider as we go through just the logistics. Some of the logistics that we are discussing, supervision of spaces. We are still looking at those overflow spaces, what we need. Each building's quite unique. If you consider the auditorium at Harold compared to Wendover, there's significantly less kids that could be held at Harold. So we need a couple extra spaces at that building versus the others. Lunches, how these kids will eat lunch. Transportation, how that's going to look. Athletics, its impact. I haven't talked to Mr. Rapp about this, but if we have to use a gymnasium or two as an overflow space, that may run into impacting the gyms being used at the middle schools for sports. Auditorium, I have to tip my hat to Mr. Anthony and the maintenance crew. They've been prototyping different solutions for using the auditorium and putting trays that will hook on the seat in front of it, almost like an airplane flip down style for students to use for their Chromebook, for their school books, et cetera. The cleaning in between classes, et cetera, and then again, the instructional models. The one thing that was very clear based on the attendance meeting, based on the meetings that I've had with the principals, is that really looking at a commitment from parents, because one of the things that we found being so difficult is that students are going back and forth between instructional modes, and it's hard to keep track of where kids should be, whether it should be A, at home, A, in front of them, virtual completely, and it switches daily because of right now our methodology. So a lot of things are going on right now, and based on that, what we're recommending is instead of starting on December 1st, we're recommending waiting till January 4th and sending the survey out and asking parents between 3 models, what would their choices be? Hoping that A, we get many more responses so we can really lock people in and better plan for the upcoming end of the second 9 weeks and third 9 weeks. Any questions about that?
Any board members have questions?
So that commitment would be looking at starting January 4th and going through March 25th.
Matt, how do the parents know when the survey is available? I mean, do you send it through the,
I send it through Remind. to
so they
every single-
all have it and they all see it?
Then we also posted it on the district website.
Okay. Any board members with questions on any of it? Nothing? Okay. Tam?
Okay, and that concludes my very long report. Thank you.
Well, it was only long because of some of us long-winded ones
That's
that
okay.
ask
It's
questions.
important to ask questions.
So then Wayne will be giving his, and you, Tammy, your COVID. I'm looking forward to that, the
Part
budget
2 next
review.
week.
That's great. Hearing of citizens, anybody?
We do have one.
Okay.
This is something that we received from a Julianne Kuzinski. As any good parent wanting the best for their children, I feel that it is important we are making the best decisions for them. We have 3 students in the Hempfield district, 1 at Harold Middle School and 2 at the high school. I know everyone is anxious to get back to life we are accustomed to, but I believe sending our students back at this time would be taking us 2 steps back in the long run. The hybrid schedule may not be perfect, may not be a perfect situation, but it is what is needed at this time. There is no need for risk of exposure when the students can stay on the hybrid schedule, half at school and half at home. For example, sending all students who cannot get rides to school on the buses would compromise the carefully calculated social distancing measures currently in effect. Giving parents and students only 2 choices is really putting them into a corner. If your student is doing well with the hybrid schedule, this option should be available to them. COVID cases are still on the rise. The main campus at Pitt has so many cases that a shelter-in-place order is currently in effect. I would not want to see the school district have to close the schools. Slow and steady is the best at this point in time. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Julianne. And I would like to make sure we emphasize it again when the remind comes out for the survey. Please fill them out because the administration wants to work with you and not just dictate what we do. Student representatives, Jacob and Nick.
Hello, everyone. Jacob Ruffer speaking. So, as you may know, last Friday we had a blood drive, which, honestly, in my opinion, it went perfect. It was very efficient, and everybody came in, gave blood, you know, relaxed a little bit before they went back to school, and went back to school. You know, our student council officers, Nick, Riley, and Gianna, they took their leadership position and like commanded the whole room, which was really nice. In total, about 73 units of blood were donated to the Red Cross, and this, especially during this time with COVID, it has shut everything down, and the Red Cross is like really desperate for blood to give out. So this was really nice for them. They were very appreciative. Yeah, and we're looking for. So our blood drive was relatively small, you know, to keep social distancing and COVID practices. Number one, and so we're looking to have smaller ones in the future, and I think, don't quote me on this, but I think our next one we're planning on is January 8th, so just look out for that one. That's it.
Anything else? Nick? Board members, any comments or questions?
Is this students only? Jake?
No, we had maybe like, I think 2 teachers. Really, anyone can come in.
Public can come? Is that what you're asking?
How about public also?
That was,
They offer first to students and staff.
yeah, it's first to students and
Usually
staff,
fills.
and then I think the
Okay.
public.
Any other comments or questions? Well, guys, I'll tell you, that's one of the things we're most proud of our students on, your involvement in the community, that you care. These are really quality things that you do, and this is one of them. Thank you so much. We appreciate it very much. And Solicitor, anything for next week coming up?
Not for next week. I just wanted to make a comment with regard to the presentation for the board. There is on the Department of Education website a provision dealing with measuring, reporting, and improving attendance in school year 2020-21, which addresses some of a lot of the information that administration was providing to you. So if you as school directors want to have a little bit more understanding as to where PDE is coming from with what they recommend as far as assessing attendance whenever it's synchronous and asynchronous, those kinds of things, you might want to look at this portion of their website, and it may give you a better understanding and appreciation for what administration is having to deal with.
Okay,
Okay?
I appreciate it. You scared me at first when you talked about their presentation. I thought you meant Wayne's presentation and your fee went up. That was concerning me.
No.
Well, thank God.
Yeah, okay.
Did your fee go down?
No, it stayed the same.
Oh, shucks. Okay, we'll have minutes to approve next meeting as well, and we'll move on to buildings and grounds. Paul?
Okay, we will have a motion next week. The first motion will be for approval to proceed with constructing an access road extending the existing Haynes House driveway to the high school student parking lot at a cost not to exceed $160,290. A second motion that Brandon Rumbaugh Solutions be approved to provide engineering and land surveying services in support of that project, the access road project. And then third motion, that a $41,559 donation be accepted from the West Hempfield Elementary PTO for the purchase of Burke playground equipment from Snyder Recreation. And those three, I guess unless we have any objections, would be on the consent agenda for next week.
Questions or comments from board members on these three motions? It might be helpful for the public too. Anything?
The only comment I guess we have not to exceed because there's some room there, right?
Correct.
Because of the township.
Our hope is to work with the township and significantly decrease that 160.
Right.
And depending on what permitting is needed, which we won't know until the plan's submitted, the 39 for Rumbaugh could come down as well.
Paul, do you remember, just real quick, on the West Hempfield playground, I don't believe they were anywhere close to 41,000 the last time they were in here. So they raised a considerable amount of money to do that. So congratulations to them. That's pretty good.
Way to point that out, Vince.
Yeah, very good.
Wayne, do you want to say something about the access road for the public's benefit? Because this will be on a consent agenda, correct? So maybe,
A project was proposed to extend the driveway that enters into the Haynes House. It's where the old food service offices were, and we do have a maintenance garage in that area for grounds equipment. To extend that road deeper towards the woods and cut up behind the property just purchased, behind the house next to it, and connect behind the high school to the student parking lot. And the whole purpose of that is to take pressure off of Spartan Drive. There's an awful lot of traffic, particularly in the mornings, of people trying to get in to the high school on Spartan Drive. And the idea of creating a additional access would be for staff only and entrance only. It would not be used as an exit. It would be used entrance only in the morning, and would hopefully, the goal is to take pressure off of Spartan Drive, making it easier to accessible for the staff and to improve the accessibility for students. We do have potentially additional students driving, and we want to make sure that it's easier for them to get to school on time and without a lot of congestion.
thanks, Wayne. Anything else from Paul, board members?
Nope, that's all.
Okay. Move on to educational programs. Jeannie?
Thank you. Next week, we will have a motion on for approving the 5-year commitment with the Forum for Workforce Development, committing to a payment of $4,000 per school year for a total of $20,000 over a 5-year period, beginning with the 2021 school year and ending with the 24-25 school year. And this is something that we have been associated with for, how many years, Dr. Willicke?
5 years. We
5
just
years
finished our
already. So we're
5-year.
starting a new 5-year period. And this has been very well received and very educational for our teachers, and then a benefit through the teachers to our students.
Wonderful. Great. Any board comments or questions for Jeannie? Is that then the only thing then, Jeannie, correct? That's it?
That concludes my report on that.
Thank you. We'll move on to Personnel Committee. Diane?
We have a lot of motions here for next week. I'm going to go through them briefly. We have our payroll specialist has turned in his resignation, and we are employing a, hopefully next week, payroll specialist who's already in the office, Sandy Riggle. We have resignation for a math teacher at the high school, resignation for a part-time, the resignation of a part-time cyber secretary. We are employing part-time long-term substitute, and we are asking for approval to reassign Ashley Testa, English teacher at the high school, to interim instructional technology coach. She is there now, and we're just extending the time. We have a long-term sub for world language, long-term sub for elementary, long-term sub for elementary cyber, full-time long-term sub for music, a long-term sub for BCIT. Let's see, we have a number of leave of absences, and let's see. Yeah, we have a number of those, and we're giving approval for some for food service workers, personal care assistants, substitute secretary. We have a number of employees for qualifying special sick leave, and I'm almost there. And the district accepts and approves the contract with ESS to provide substitute secretaries, building aides, and classroom supervisors. The effective date of the contract is November 17th, 2020 through June 30th of 2021, and then following substitute teacher list. And that's it.
Thank you. Any questions from board members or comments? Anything needs to be added, Bob, or no? Okay. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate it. And we'll move on to athletic committee. Vince?
We'll have 3 items on the agenda to be approved for next week. I'm not going to go in order for a reason here. 1 will be launching a new website for athletics. 2 will be accepting new scheduling software. And the third is we have 3 individuals looking to represent Hempfield and participate in the 2020-21 WPIL and PIAA gymnastics season. I do want to have Brandon explain that one really quick. And also, if he has any update on the winter season, I think now would be a good time.
Perfect. Thank you. Just briefly on the gymnastics scenario. So Hempfield area, we do not sponsor a male or female gymnastics program or team here, but we do have the ability to submit at least 1 representative from the district, to represent the district at the WPIL or PIAA playoffs. However, we are allowed to permit students to participate throughout the regular season as well. And that's what we're doing by this motion right here. So, they would represent the district as individuals, individual representatives. And then at the end of the year, we would have the opportunity to submit 1 of those, if not more, depending on the criteria and how the WPI gymnastics levels work out. We may be able to submit all 3 or at least 1 minimum to those championships. So they would be doing that at no cost to the district. And then again, a quick update on the winter season. At this point in time, both the WPIL and PIAA have met. Their intentions are to continue with the winter season or start the winter season as regularly scheduled. Practices would begin on the 20th of this month. And at this point in time, although there are a few meetings still scheduled over the next couple of weeks, at this point in time, there has been no adjustments to any of the winter schedules like we saw in the fall. So no reduction in competitions. And things would kick off as scheduled at this point in time. And I caution on that just because there are a couple of meetings. We're continuing to monitor that, but we're excited to kick things off here at the end of next week.
Yeah, I thought it was important for him to go over the gymnastics because I'm not sure if you guys approved that before with any individuals or not, but I think it's important that people know that there is an opportunity there if you do. That's great. And I know Monday we will have we'll have a date for the next athletic committee meeting as well.
Okay. Paul, do you have a question?
Just on the gymnastics, and I don't recall over the past, I guess, about 5 years, us ever talking about a request or to have an actual gymnastics team. But I was just curious if that had ever come up. It sounds similar to the girls' golf situation where we're allowed to have representatives, but we don't actually have a team. I'm just curious.
It's been about 3 years
Is
since we
okay.
have had this program, and typically it was always introduced through the volunteer when we have them recognized by this board, that it would be, John Doe, volunteer gymnastic coach, and that's where we would spark the conversation. But it's been about 3 years since we've had students interested in participating in the gymnastics program.
I didn't recall that. Yeah, okay. A specific request for a team. Okay.
Just for identification purposes, that was Paul Ward asking a question and Bob Rieger, our HR person, answering the question. Any other questions from board members? Paul, you finished?
Yes, I'm finished.
Okay. I have a comment on that. I don't know the other 2 young ladies, but Emerson I do know, and I know she's very accomplished at gymnastics, and she's been winning the state a lot of times with it. So it's really nice that we have this opportunity for the kids. She's only a freshman, I think, too. I don't know what the age the other 2 are, but this is nice. It's good. I did have a question too, and I'm kind of a burr under Vince's saddle a little bit, I think, about the girls softball. And Brendan, I would like to allow for these girls that had worked on this and petitioned this back in February at one of the athletic committees to come next week and bring their petitions in, because they've been wanting to do it, but with COVID couldn't do it. And now I know that you're researching it a little bit, Brandon, and and that's okay. I get that, and I don't have a problem with it. But knowing that their season's going to be in the spring coming up, I'd like to afford these children to come here at our meeting, because we can bring people in, the public in, and present their petitions like they wanted to do before, and then present their opinion on it as well, if it's not going to upset an apple cart for you, Brandon, or you, Vince.
What I would say too, just as an update on that situation, so we certainly discussed at an athletic committee meeting. I've reached out to those individuals. We actually are planning to meet. I asked them to bring that to the athletic department so that we could kind of bring that through, the proper channels. We're actually scheduled to meet next Monday prior to the board meeting with the athletic department with those individuals, so they can bring that, to my attention and kind of bring me up to speed, and then I'd be happy to report back on how that went as well. But
That's
I do have that
perfect.
meeting
Then I'll
scheduled.
back off, and completely, I didn't realize that was happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, any comments?
No, Paul's going to take supplemental.
Okay.
Sonia's not here.
And supplementals, Paul?
Okay, there will be 3 motions for next week. The first one is for the recognition of a volunteer coach for bowling. The second is for the, and that's Dre Minchucci. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's the bowling coach. Second would be for the motion to accept the resignation of Jerry Way as assistant girls tennis coach. And then the third motion will be for approving extended pay for coaches from girls volleyball and girls tennis for I assume that was for playoffs, additional pay. And that's it. That's the 3 motions.
Okay. Any questions or comments from board members? Those will be on the consent agenda as well, right? And we'll move on to Finance Committee. And Diane, would you mind taking that?
Nope, that's fine, I can do it. We will be voting next week on the proposed tax assessment appeal settlement, the authorization for our legal team to finalize the proposed tax assessment appeal. Let's see, we will have dollars, the actual amount for the depository report and for the bills due and payable. And we will also be voting on the tax collector's report for the month of September of 2020, and that the activity statements be approved.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Questions or comments from the board? Wayne, do you have anything to add to this? No. Okay, thank you. And Diane, is that it?
Yep,
Thank you so much. And Policy Committee, Jeannie.
Thank you. Next week, we'll be asked to vote on approving a policy that has been on 30-day review, which is Policy 101, the mission statement, the vision statement, and the shared values statements. We're going to be asked to put 6 policies on for 30-day review. Policy 113.1, discipline of students with disabilities. Policy 113.2, behavior support. Policy 113.4, confidentiality of special education student information. Policy 122, extracurricular activities. Policy 123, interscholastic athletics. And Policy 123.2, sudden cardiac arrest. And then there are several fundraisers that we're going to be asked to approve as well. I'm not going to read all those.
Okay. All right.
Finally, several ARs were approved, and they are listed at the bottom. That concludes my report.
Thanks, Jeannie. Any questions from board members? Okay, Technology Committee, Scott.
Yes, next week we'll be putting forth a motion T0820 that permission be given for the business office to advertise and seek proposals for Chromebooks for the 2020-2021 school year.
Any comments on that?
If I will share briefly. We are receiving an additional grant through the PCCD, the Safe Schools, and the money that we're receiving, $155,000. It does allow us to purchase additional Chromebooks. That's one of the items that is listed. And currently, and Mr. Wagner's here to assist me in explaining this, we are experiencing an issue with one model of our Chromebook, which is probably our 3rd from the oldest model. And that with the updates, the camera, we're finding faulty cameras. It's not functioning as it needs to, especially for our Google Meets. So while we are currently waiting on one order that was placed in July, those particular devices are the touch screens that we want to direct to our earliest learners, K1 and 2. But we do feel that if we're going to continue to experience glitches, faults with these devices that are now reaching an age where they're no longer being supported, we need to be ready to replace those devices. So we felt going out for bid now was appropriate so that then those grant funds that we just learned that we'll be receiving can be utilized for that purpose.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that was Brandon Rapp, our IT,
Wagner.
or Brandon Wagner.
Many
I'm giving you
Brandons.
more jobs over there, Brandon. Brandon Wagner, sorry. We'll move on to Technology Committee, Central Westmoreland Career and Technology Center. Scott?
I have nothing other than, we have no meeting this month. There was not one scheduled, and our reorganization meeting has yet to be scheduled for December.
Okay, thank you. How's it working out down there, the new director?
Excellent, and I'm trying to work it out, and I believe he's been in touch with Dr. Walicki, or will be soon. We're going to try to get him in to speak to the board, and just
Wonderful.
to kind of give a synopsis of what's going on down there. So he's been handling a lot of things, and we didn't want to put him on the spot too early, but I've got dibs to get him first. So just
Good, that's great for everybody. I promise I won't ask him too many questions. We'll move on to Westmoreland Intermediate Unit. Jennifer?
I'll give you a quick summary of our October meeting. We accepted the resignation of John Cernesi from Mount Pleasant Area School District from the Westmoreland Intermediate Unit Board of Directors. We then appointed Michael Piskarczyk from Mount Pleasant Area School District to fill his vacancy for the remainder until July of 2021. We then elected Susan Maines as the vice president until the next election in July of 2021. We approved several staff and teacher retirements and resignations. We also approved a termination of an employee. We approved an agreement with Intermediate Unit 1 to provide consecutive services in the areas of adult basic and literacy education service. We approved an agreement with EduLink Incorporated for an electronic teacher evaluation portal. We approved an agreement with the Pennsylvania Department of Education for a Keystone Telepresence Education Grant. We approved agreements with the following to provide speaking services for the November Step Up Westmoreland membership meeting: Growing Leaders, Cornelius Holmes, and Ann Moss Rogers. We approved a financing agreement with First National Bank for the purchase of a 2020 Ford Transit lift van, which cost $62,138 pending a solicitor review. And we approved an agreement with Silvis Group Incorporated for a snow removal of the Westmoreland Intermediate Unit Administration Building and Clarendon School. And our next meeting date is November 24th. I believe it's virtual at 7 p.m.
Thank you. Any board questions? Thanks for a really good report, Jennifer. Appreciate it. We'll move on to school board report. We do have two items to continue with MBM for our solicitorship, and to continue with Andrews and Price, special counsel for special education matters. Those will be on the consent agenda next week. And we'll move on to reports. Then I'm assuming that all these will be given at the agenda meeting, or is there a report tonight from people at the agenda meeting? Diane, Jennifer, there's nothing pressing on any of these right now?
No, our next meeting for the is December 15th
For the drug and awareness
Yes.
prevention?
at 4 p.m.
Okay. Anything else? Any further hearing of citizens? Hearing nothing, do I have a motion for adjournment?
so moved.
Motion by Scott, second by Mike.